Hello and welcome to the Mobile Game Dev Playbook. Thanks for tuning in for another episode and welcome to our first video episode as well. Very exciting. Didn't do my hair. Annoying, didn't know. So anyway, this is the podcast, now videocast, that provides insights into what makes a great mobile game, what is and isn't working for mobile game designers, and all the latest trends. I'm your host, John Jordan. So today's episode is going to go into a really great depth into an area which is actually undergoing a lot of sort of dynamic change at the moment. And that's looking at best practice around the creative strategy for being successful with ads and ad placements from a mobile game perspective. And to talk about that, we have four experts kind of coming at it from two sort of different angles. So we have the game development side and sort of the ad tech side. They're obviously part of the same, both sides of the same coin, but kind of broadly different approaches. So we're going to kind of delve into that. We have two people from Rovio and two from Vungle. So from Rovio, we have Jussi Napuri, who is the Senior Performance Marketing Specialist leading the Small Town Murders game. How's it going, Jussi?
Good to be here.
Good. And also we have Anne-Marie Pelkonen, who is the Performance Marketing Manager for the Angry Birds Dream Blast game. How's it going, Anne-Marie?
Good. Thanks for inviting me.
Good. Excellent. So you're going to be kind of taking us through how you see this kind of very important part now of making a successful mobile game. And on the ad tech side, from Vungle, we have Gavin, who is Global Head of Creative Labs. How's it going, Gavin?
It's good. Really excited to talk creative.
Good. And Natalie Southern from the Mobile Podly. That sounds a very excellent kind of job title to have. How are you?
I'm very well, yeah, and I'm very pleased with that job title as well. It's great.
Can I ask what is a motion pod? What is a motion pod?
So the Motion Pod at Vungle are a core group of motion graphic designers, but we also focus on mainly the video units. But the entire VCL is broken up into little pods that we all collaborate with. So we have an interactive pod, a sort of beyond gaming pod. So yeah, that's how our teams work.
Good. And that actually leads us kind of to the first question. So I think, not being an expert in this kind of area like you guys, but I kind of dabble. I kind of drift in and out. I kind of occasionally hear things going on in what's going on in the kind of this kind of space. And terms are thrown around like get creative with your creative, which is a lovely buzz phrase. I kind of understand as a journalist that's great as a headline. Not entirely sure what it means using creative in two different ways. So I kind of thought maybe to start off, if we kind of go round the panel and you can talk a little bit from your perspective what does kind of creative mean and the term get creative with your creative. Maybe Jussi, do you want to kind of go first? We'll go with the game developers first.
Yeah, so creative is basically synonymous with an ad, so that we use the word to describe a video, a banner ad, or even a playable. So basically a bit of a generalization of all of that.
Okay. Anne-Marie?
I think Jussi put it well.
Okay. no more additions. So Gavin, I guess you're looking at it from a slightly different point of view in the sense that you're the ad tech who kind of funneling in all these kind of clients. What does creative mean from your kind of perspective?
Okay, so from my perspective, having been at Vungle and in the ad tech world for over 9 years now, creative has definitely gone through a lot of changes. But Vungle Creative Labs, it's essentially what is in front of that user. It can be a video, an interactive experience, a 360 experience, a playable experience. Ultimately, it's about telling stories and engaging users to get excited about apps and games.
We're already delving now into the second level of kind of terms, 360s and storytelling. I guess we'll get into that. But Natalie, on the subject of creative.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as Gavin was saying, it's like often it's the first thing that a user will see, so it really sets the tone for your brand. So our job really is to get it right from the beginning to get the best chance of something converting to that person seeing an advert, or as we say, our creative, and then downloading and enjoying that game.
I would also say, and continuing to get it right for our advertisers.
Okay. So I guess from kind of from a very specific point of view, we have kind of people who are kind of trying to encourage people to play and download and be engaged with their game. So I guess Jussi, in terms of Small Town Murders, do you want to explain a little bit about what that game is, and kind of the genre, and how you've been kind of thinking about kind of your creative, now I know the term, I can use it properly, your kind of creative process for you know, that kind of advertising?
Yeah. Good question. So, Small Town Murders is a narrative match 3 game, and it's about kind of solving murder mysteries within a small town. You meet a few characters and then kind of follow their journey. When it comes to creative, we kind of approach it in a way that what makes sense in the kind of the game's universe. So if it's about solving crime, you know, that can mean a lot of things about arranging evidence, you know, putting things together to catch different suspects, and also using match 3, but not necessarily always. So basically, even when you're kind of maybe putting an alibi together, you know, maybe you're merging a little few pieces here and there. So then you can tie a merge mechanic into that. So there's a lot of things we can borrow, a lot of things we can like come up with ourselves. And definitely when it comes to narrative, that's one of the most important parts of the kind of the creative strategy that we're running.
And how would that reflect in the kind of in the creative that you do? Would you kind of very much, because you've got characters, would you very much kind of focus on the characters, and that would be your kind of way in?
Yeah, we never want to make it too complicated. So of course we have 50 to 100 different characters, but we kind of focus on the ones that matter. We also don't want to make the gameplay too kind of complicated. So that's something that we always consider, is that how can we use our kind of main mechanic in kind of the game to, you know, tell a narrative.
Okay, so Anne-Marie, you have I guess another match-3 game, but a slightly sort of different. I guess it has a characters and narrative, but not quite in the same way. So how do you approach it?
So Angry Birds Dream Blast is one of our biggest games. So as you said, it's a puzzle game, but it has kind of a very unique core in terms of that it's very physics based. So the core is really the star of the game. We of course do have the Angry Birds IP, and then we have the characters in there, and there's some like kind of dream world and story in there in terms of events and all sorts of this kind of stuff, but much less focus on the narrative compared to Small Town Murders then.
And I guess for something working on a big IP like Angry Birds, that's great because people know what Angry Birds is. But I guess for you working on one specific game, there is coordination between what the other Angry Birds games are doing, that you don't want to be sort of, I guess you've got to be sort of doing the same thing, but also, you know, you have a very specific game that you're working on in the Angry Birds kind of franchise. So how do you kind of differentiate yourself?
Yeah, like you said, the key is differentiation between, like, if you're doing multiple games with the same IP, because we don't want to go after the exact same demographic and the exact same audience. Of course, there's going to be overlap because audiences are usually, you're going after a broad audience as well, not very like super niche. But yeah, we want to make sure that there's like a different look, it's a different angle to the IP, etc.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Gavin, from your point of view, what are the trends you're seeing? We've got a few things sort of mentioned now. I guess we know that ads, there's lots of different types of ads now. I guess we probably still kind of a bunch of banner ads and interstitials, and now we have the kind of cooler things like playables. And do you see any sort of trends in that sort of in the way that ads are sort of being kind of deployed?
Absolutely. So the space is definitely becoming more competitive. More apps out there really vying for users, and UA buyers are getting a lot smarter and a lot more sophisticated, especially in their creative strategy. And the two words creative strategy actually wasn't something we heard a couple of years ago, but now we actually have a pod within Bungle Creative Labs, which is the creative strategy pod. Essentially, what we're looking to do there is really understand the needs of our advertisers. Different advertisers have different needs. Let's say a hyper-casual publisher that's churning out a good amount of apps every single month has very different requirements to, let's say, a legacy, a classic IP like Angry Birds, and they very much need a different type of creative approach. That comes from the type of creative you're producing. what is your objective here? Are you looking for scale? Are you looking for quality? Do you want to unlock new users in specific publishers? You can actually do that with creative strategy. But ultimately, and we really believe this, it comes down to the concepts. And we're really seeing in the space, and especially with Game Refinery, these concepts can come from really interesting places.
Just to add to that, what Gavin was saying about Game Refinery and talking about small town murders there, I think for us, like a big trend and the future of creative will be looking at those kind of user motivations. So recently we were actually using Game Refinery, the analysis tool there, to look at small town murders. And one of the big things that's been coming up is around role playing. So I believe that like our interactive pod right now, they're working very hard on a playable that is sort of text-based, and it'll be like an interrogation. So you can sort of be that role-playing detective interviewing a suspect. So it's kind of, how you come at a creative really depends on those initial motivations, comparing it to the game and also maybe the publisher that the user is also, watching the ad in as well.
In general, anyone can answer this. Are we seeing sort of playable ads? I mean, they've been around for a few years in various forms. Are they? I guess they're kind of harder to do well because they're almost like making little games in and of themselves. But are they becoming like a much more important part of kind of gaining a user who is really going to like the game rather than showing sort of the same ad to everyone?
For Dream Blast, playables have been maybe a bit more important than the average game. It might be just because it's very easy to make playables comparably to puzzle games than thinking of Midcore or something else. But I would say definitely the playable has not taken over video. Video is still king. Like there's no doubt about that. But there's certainly interesting developments happening with playables. If you just like look into Facebook or Google, for example, what they're doing with their playable betas, whether it's cloud playables or just like bigger playables, the whole venturing into a more immersive and more rich experience that is not just an ad, if we can say that, but it's like you said, it's an experience. It's a snippet of the game. You get a feel for it. So for me, that's very interesting where we can go with that. But it might be that we're not there yet fully.
Yeah, and maybe I can add to that is that when looking at a game like Small Town Murders, we're working with quite a few narratives. So when you have when you're using a lot of different narratives, a lot of different maybe game mechanics, you have your video, that's going to have one element which needs to carry through into the whole the game, through the first time user experience, through the app store and the playable. So that has to be really kind of solid. And a lot of things can go wrong if you're kind of testing those elements too much.
I guess at this point I will ask the question because maybe other people are thinking about it. So we have seen from some companies I guess a slightly elastic kind of attitude to playable ads and the content in the playable ads and the actual game. So now obviously this must work because otherwise they wouldn't keep doing it. But I guess from the game point of view, can you see why people would sort of kind of stretch the envelope a little bit of the playable ad you're doing and the game just to kind of, particularly I guess if they want to drive downloads.
So we actually have an internal phrase for such creatives. We call it atypical creative. So it's essentially creative. It's atypical. It deviates from being representative of the core gameplay mechanic. I think this trend is coming from a place though. If you've noticed over time, games are becoming more complex. You see the rise of the meta game. So you have a core gameplay functionality and then meta game that focuses outside of that. So the decision then becomes, what do you want to focus on in your playable units? Very likely most advertisers will be going live with a playable experience that is very representative of gameplay. But you can also experiment with these mini games. The real question is actually what do you actually select to focus on when it comes to these mini games? And we've actually done a series of testing around this. And while you can deviate from your core gameplay representation, you will see some negative impact there. So while you may see an uptick in, let's say, your conversion rate, there is a possibility that your retention might be down. Like obviously, if the user plays playable, they'll like it a lot. They download the game, and they're not able to access that content. The retention is going to be quite poor there. So you need to really focus on what do you want to highlight here, and this is actually something that we've used Game Refinery for. You can be a bit more experimental with the themes of your game, but as long as you're really staying true to the core, the kind of motivations why the users like this game, you can actually really be a bit more elastic, as you say, with that content.
Yeah, I can pick up here. Yeah, as Gavin was saying, it's quite a balance with working with, yeah, as we call it, the atypical side of things, because one of our big challenges is avoiding fatigue with our users, and especially if they're seeing that same kind of advert a million times, they kind of know it's not going to be the actual game. It can easily turn people off. But at the same time, that sort of atypical approach can really help with games that do have like a large IP, like Angry Birds. So, for example, we were working on a playable for Angry Birds, and our team decided to move away from the playable where you launch the birds at the sort of piggy base. We all know that that's what happens in the game. That's how it works. However, we kind of made it slightly atypical by reversing it, still very much keeping it in that world of that sort of, that gaming universe. But first off, you build up the base a little bit. So you kind of construct the tower. So instead of, you're kind of basically building it to make it resistant to the bird attacks. So if you have a sound structure, the birds won't destroy it. And if you don't, it just gets completely wrecked. And then to complement that, we made the video, because as Anne-Marie was saying, video still is very powerful. So if you can have that video that sells in the narrative, then lead to a playable where the user can actually give it a go. That seems to be a really good approach for actually buying people into the narrative. And then of course, yeah, we obviously A/B test, whether this is going to have an effect on retention or conversion. And see what the effect is on the network.
I think it's also it's interesting to note, and this is very much a trend that's emerging right now. You have these more atypical style creatives going out into the space, and essentially the game developers are using them to test new gameplay features. It's obviously a little bit cheaper to build a playable unit, test out in the space, see if it actually gets an impact, and then build it as a feature to your app, especially if you're looking to kind of have that long-term retention and looking to engage new users. It's really interesting and exciting development that you wouldn't have had a couple of years ago, the concept of doing your game dev via UA experimentation. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's definitely super useful to use for marketability, early marketability testing and just verifying your game concepts. So as Gavin said, without pouring too much cost into them to start with. And I think really the motivation of going for the atypical or we could say fake even creatives is keeping it fresh. You're trying to get those users, but still it's a very, very tricky balancing act. Like Gavin said, do you wanna lose on that retention or those post-install metrics?
Good. Yes, it's very euphemism, atypical creative, isn't it? It's kind of. I think Anne-Marie said it like most people would think it, but there we go. That's it. So there was a kind of interesting kind of aspect there. We mentioned A/B testing, which I guess kind of people have an idea about. But does someone want to kind of give an introduction into a little bit of kind of what A/B testing is? Because I guess it is. Yeah, I guess it started out you'd have one version of something and another version and see which one people like best. I imagine it's fairly more complicated than that now.
A/B testing is very important to us, but very often people talk about it in very binary terms. You have an A creative, a B creative. You set it live in whichever one gets the most installs or conversion is the winner. Really, we find you have to be a lot more granular than that. And this is something that Vungle really looks to do with our clients, is get a real understanding of what are you actually looking to learn with A/B testing here. Which publishers do you want to test on? Are you aware of the percentage of expiration both of these creatives are going to get? Because that's ultimately going to impact the results you're going to get. And I would always say, and this is kind of my own perspective, when it comes to A/B testing, there's kind of there's very much an attitude I feel comes from kind of UX about when you do A/B testing. You kind of like move something a pixel over this way or slightly change the color. We actually find doing more significant tests becomes more impactful. So I would say be more granular with the data, understand what the objective of your A/B test is. Definitely be more impactful with the change you want to have there, but also understand you will probably have to A/B test a lot until you find like your next hit or that next big change that's really going to instruct your creative strategy going forward. So yeah, granular, impactful, except that it's not always going to work is how we would approach A/B test.
Yeah. And one thing that I want to bring up is modularity in creatives. So that's something that you want to keep in mind when you're designing creatives, is that you have these variables that you can test, whether it's like whether it's the gameplay, the characters, the narrative, end card, all of that, so that you already like take the variation phase into like the kind of early phase of producing the creative, so that there's lots of different things you can test, and so you don't have to do that afterwards with too much kind of difficulty. So designing creatives with modularity in mind, so that you can kind of test as many elements as possible.
I would 100% agree with that. There was an example that came up this week. We were looking to produce a new playable for an advertiser that was looking to scale in the Japan market. We actually worked with them on some Japanese-specific creative in the past, and actually got our team in Tokyo to make some really nice anime versions of all of their avatars and stuff like that. And as we were designing the playable, we said, okay, well, we want to be able to have this dynamically localized for Japan and test the impact of that. And then obviously we want to be able to switch out the assets on the fly. So in Japan, you see those manga assets. At the same time, we're thinking, hey, how do we use like manga and anime is incredibly popular in the West as well. We can also test it with English language, but then with the Japanese artwork. So yeah, being modular, always considering what you're going to test as you develop is also very important.
And just to add on the developer side, super important to also go into A/B testing with a hypothesis. I can't, like, this is the boring stuff, but documentation, like taking those learnings and implementing it back to your creative strategy, that's like super important in my opinion.
So that was an interesting discussion, and kind of leads on to my next question, which you've kind of, I guess, started to kind of peel into. But where when we're talking about kind of this kind of creative production, obviously, sort of the game is the core, because that's kind of the focus on what you're trying to get people to engage with. But clearly, it seems where the creative comes from and how that may kind of vary on particular campaigns or something. But how do you sort of, from the game developer point of view and the sort of ad tech kind of provider point of view, where does the kind of creative, the actual who makes that sort of strategy? Where does that come from? Does that depend a bit on the game and the developer and where you are in the kind of process, or is that something always that the developer will kind of go, well, we're good at making games, we don't really want to sully our pure hands with this advertising kind of creative stuff and hand it all over to the ad tech people? How does that work out? I guess Gavin, maybe, or no, Natalie, maybe you can kind of from your point of view, how do you see that?
I think it's it's a relationship, and I mean we have a creative account strategy pod for this reason, is that we want to kind of, the stronger our relationship is with the clients and our advertisers, sometimes the more free will they give us with their creative, and I often find out that this is the way that we get the most out of it, whether it means that we internally build the creative and make it for them, or else we can advise on what we see as like the best way that they could move forward with their creatives that they make. And I think for us, like for our creative and for our process, it really starts with our team. As I said, like we're broken down into the pods, and having different people from different pods all in the same room, or really on the same Zoom call as it's been right now. But yeah, that's when the magic really happens. And so you can then sort of pitch ideas to the advertiser, or often, like the people they work with, they kind of feel that, they want to trust us, and that's why we set up these things like these tests. So we might be testing against a concept that they have, and yeah, it's a really good way to sort of build out those hypotheses and just build on each other's work.
Yeah, I would say from the Vungle side, we have a bit of an advantage over some of the developers we work with, namely being we produce creative for thousands of apps and games. In addition to that, we have an understanding on how they performed on the Vungle network. So that very much informs the decisions we take with creative. But now with Game Refinery, we're actually getting way more insights into what is performing where on the Vungle network and which publishers, for which advertisers, what elements of those advertisers are you starting to see shared across advertiser, publisher, and then also in the creative. It means that we're able to not only come to our clients with that knowledge to say, hey, we think you should do X, Y, and Z because we've made a couple of creatives in the past and they seem to do quite well. We can actually pinpoint, we believe this is why this specific creative is appealing to users in this specific publisher because there's something about this creative that's resonating with your app, but then also the users in this app. How can we pinpoint on that, and how do we represent it with creative? Like, it's basically a lot of data, but at the end of the day, it's got to turn into something beautiful. It's like it's art and science. So we really look forward to kind of working with our clients to kind of like find that balance.
I mean, Yoshi, do you have the ability? I mean, do you prefer to do it in house, or are you quite happy to hand it over to someone else? What's the balance there?
UA is usually kind of the source of our creative strategy and ideas, but we understand that when you kind of concentrate that kind of ideation into a very small group, that's where the risk starts to come because, we're all kind of boxed in our own ideas. So we try and collaborate with a lot of, people from the game team, whether it's kind of art team, kind of designers, narrative writers, and we all kind of get together to kind of really discuss those and kind of deconstruct our creatives. Because when you have a lot of people, you can then kind of measure kind of you can see the impact and, how people are feeling for this concept and that concept. I think we have been kind of doing a lot of outsourcing, so we have both. We do it internally as well, but I think what we're seeing is that there is kind of the creative team is becoming ever more important and that developers can produce their own creatives really quickly as well, and because of course outsourcing can take quite a lot of time, so that's something that we're doing as well and focusing on.
Mm-hmm. Do we, Anne-Marie, I guess kind of there's still some sort of pure concept that kind of game developers sit there and they spend all their time very focused on their game, and the designers designing things and the artists making art and programmers putting it all together, and things like advertising, just like, we don't really do that. I mean, is that sort of kind of pigeonhole kind of stereotype breaking down now, and actually, because I guess a game team wants the game to be successful, and if they can make the advertising better and the UA better, then why wouldn't they? I mean, are they people generally kind of quite broad-minded towards that, or is there still a little bit of we don't do that sort of thing, we just focus on the actual game bit?
Yeah, I'm super happy to say that with Rovio, we don't have those kind of pigeonholes or silos anymore so much, and we're actually we have a very very eager game teams in that perspective to participate a lot in the creative strategy and know and be very in tune with what's happening on the ad side. So that's great, and we've always said that the ideas can come from anywhere as long as someone kind of holds the keys to the car, so that we maintain focus and the pipeline works. That's super important. To add to Jussi's comment, that what we do want to do is definitely try and learn from our network partners, especially for that reason, what Gavin said, because of the wider visibility. Of course, we can benchmark, etc. on the developer side, but just having that conversation and change of knowledge is super important as well.
I don't know if it quite counts as an elephant in the room sort of thing, but we've been talking kind of how this kind of creative thing is created and kind of attracts people into games, and we're kind of trying to bring our kind of users into the kind of the narrative of what's going on, and a lot of that is kind of, I guess, predicated on this big kind of technology UA stack that has been created over the last 10 years. It's a beautiful thing. It really helps game developers kind of spend their advertising in the right way. Unfortunately, it appears to some degree to be going away. So we've got this kind of idea that Apple's kind of changing its kind of privacy settings. This whole other thing about the kind of IDFA now being opt-in rather than being kind of a default on. Obviously, it's kind of just happening now with the release of iOS 14.5. So we don't really know what's happened yet because it hasn't happened yet. But I guess on a general point of view, do you think that how do you think that's going to play out? I've kind of seen like a spectrum of kind of attitude from people think it's a total disaster and basically the whole thing's up in flames, to some people kind of thinking, well, it'll be a kind of a bit of a kind of bump in the road for a few months and then be back to normal. I guess probably somewhere between those two things. But does anyone want to kind of Gavin, you're nodding your head. You can go first. I mean, how do you? I imagine at Vungle you spent a lot of time thinking about this sort of stuff and planning around it.
It's definitely come up in discussion. I will admit that. I would say creators going to have to work a lot harder. But to be honest, we've been moving in that direction already. You've seen it in the space. Things are becoming more competitive. There's only so much, especially for a UA manager, you can do with like bids and targeting. And I think this is why there's been more and more of a focus on creative production, producing the right creative. How do you hit your target users? We've approached this in a couple of ways, and we're feeling pretty happy with our first release testing results on this. One way we're approaching this kind of post-IDFA world is essentially, can you target via a creative? Which is kind of a weird thing, right? But what we've looked to do here, and we've actually done this with a couple of like non-gaming advertisers. So essentially, an ad unit, a video experience appears, and you ultimately have a choice. And we've done this for TikTok recently. So either, hey, do you like cat videos or do you like dog videos? I know Nat and I were both cat people, so we probably both picked the cat. But essentially, the rest of the video experience is now relevant to that specific user. You could do the same thing with, let's say you have a mid-core game which has a metacore element. You could have, which do you prefer? Is it the core game or is it the meta game? You're able to start doing some targeting there. And then also when you're tracking those analytics events, you're starting to understand more of the decisions being made there. I think something that we feel quite happy about with this new world is the zombie metric of CTR may be getting put down in the grave yet again. There was definitely a push where you were seeing like CTRs getting higher and higher. We're hoping that with some greater transparency there, we're going to see more focus on the content, really showing users something that excites them, engages them, and makes them click to download and ultimately play. Because ultimately, privacy and transparency is something all of us in the industry should really welcome. So looking forward to this new world in which we occupy, I guess.
And from the Rovio point of view, how have you had any sort of company discussions and thoughts about how are you gonna kind of just wait to see what happens, or are you kind of taking new strategies when it comes to spending your ad money and getting the people that you want, which may be harder now?
Yeah, definitely. We've had discussions on the Rovio side as well. We've been trying to prepare a lot, and I think. Someone said that you should not be in UA if you're prone to panic. So this is not the first or the last difficulty or bump in the road that is going to come. So we're going to try and do our best to live in the new environment. Of course, this is going to be unfortunate in terms of granularity and in terms of what we're going to be seeing on a creative level, especially if we think about networks on a wider scope. But then again, this is an opportunity also to invest a bit more in creative and okay, this is such a cliche, but being more creative with your creative. So
good.
It's an opportunity also. It's not only a panic situation.
And I guess it's actually it seems to be some suggestion that companies like Rovio that have a very large audience. And has kind of lots of games using the same sort of characters. Maybe you at least one thing you can do is kind of cross promote. I'm sure you do a lot of that anyway, but it seems like that seems to be kind of one obvious strategy, that if you have people who are really interested in characters and different types of games, to promote those amongst your own titles is kind of the most obvious way of not worrying about who exactly these people are, because they already kind of love your games.
Yeah, we do cross promo, so that's at least something that we'll still have. But I think on the network side, especially when we think about contextual targeting, so all the knowledge that you have already gathered during the past years, maybe about what genres, what publishers, what sort of like device mixes, everything in that ballpark works for you, the better you're off.
Good. Okay, so I guess we're sort of coming to the end. It's been a good time to kind of sum up. I guess you may be kind of talking again about some other things you've kind of mentioned in the podcast, but kind of how do you see for the next kind of, well, I guess where we are now, for the next kind of 6 months or so in 2021, how do you see kind of the role of creative changing? Is it going to be, broadly kind of what we've seen before? Is it going to be an acceleration, maybe because of things like IDFA? How do you see that playing out? Yoshi, how do you think you're going to be kind of addressing this for small town murders?
Yeah, so I think that we're going to see a lot of developers stepping outside the box with their creatives. Now that kind of we've seen the wave of misleading creatives over the last 2 years, I think that's just going to continue. And, developers have to kind of, keep their creative strategy fresh. And at least for small town murderers, we're doing that by kind of understanding that sometimes broad targeting can work better, so making creatives that really kind of appeal to the whole population and not just kind of a niche of players that we know monetize well or kind of really connect with our game. So that's a kind of an art in itself, is that how you make a creative that anyone can kind of connect to, and maybe we're working on that with kind of the narratives and more kind of storytelling within our ads.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Natalie?
I have something to follow up on that. With the taking, I think a lot of creatives are going to take more inspiration from what's around us. I have an example actually about small town murders, because sort of during the lockdown, it was at the time that everyone was talking about Tiger King. We were actually brainstorming ideas for small town murders, and that game, as Jussi was saying, was that the main creative ideas are usually around like finding clues and going through suspects and sort of trying to find the murderer, whereas we wanted to flip the script on that. And flip the script is such a great term, but they have this fantastic sort of femme fatale character, so we wanted to maybe look at doing the creative from the murderer's point of view. And I don't want to say name any names just in case I get sued, but there is we did put in the potential of disposing of evidence by using a tiger, so if anyone's watched Tiger King, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think those kind of things, taking inspiration, just as I say, finding different angles of how you could present that creative while still keeping it in the world, still not completely going full atypical. I think that will continue to be the trend.
Gavin?
I would say from my side, you're going to see an increased focus on granular contextual data, which oddly I think is actually going to make the world more creative, which is kind of an odd thing to say. But we're really seeing it, having a better understanding on why users are playing games, what do they like about them, how is that representative and creative, actually means you're going to get better, more exciting creative that really starts communicating messages, makes our space a lot more enjoyable. I actually have a little anecdotal story here. We actually we've recently made a video for a Merge style title recently, and actually utilizing Game Refinery really kind of identified a lot of their publishers and a lot of their users really like this kind of like thinking and solving motivation. So we produced like this video where in standard Merge, you've got to like kind of like identify what you want to merge around. Rather than just showing that happening, we did like freeze frame. Basically says, like in American football where the coach, like he kind of like draws down, he's like, you're going to go up this side and you're going to go down that side and then we'll tackle that guy. So we have a similar sort of thing, but with like the drawings on the screen saying, I'm going to merge this over here, this over here. And that was really impactful. Actually, it brought to mind something that happened during lockdown. I ended up playing a lot of Resident Evil 2 over Christmas instead of spending time with my family. And I realized the most enjoyable part was sitting with my girlfriend and pausing the game, looking at the map and saying, okay, we want to go from here to here. We want to avoid this zombie here, but this herb in this box, and then come back round. It was really that element that was appealing to me. So it's like, hey, that's crazy that we're understanding that element is appealing to this specific user. How do we represent that? So as I say, more granular contextual data is going to make the world a lot more creative.
Mm-hmm. Good. It takes me back a long time looking at the map in Resident Evil 2. Wow. Okay, Anne-Marie, how do you see things? playing out this year?
Yeah, like Gavin said, really knowing who is your audience, at least the core of it, making sure that your creatives are able to appeal also to the broad audience, since we're not really doing so much very targeted targeting anymore. And then what else? Yeah, I think like maybe going there's gonna be more weight in terms of developing bigger concepts instead of focusing on variations, because I think that's just gonna bring bigger results and make more sense in this new normal that we're going into.
Lovely, excellent. Thank you for that. And I've got a new term now, going full atypical. That should be somehow a meme. I don't quite know what that meme would be. I don't know how you get a cat going full atypical, but I'll think about it. Maybe do some A/B testing. Okay, thanks very much to the panel. We've covered a lot there. I hope it's been interesting. Certainly I've learned a lot. So thank you, Gavin and Natalie from Vungle. And so thank you, Yushi and Anne-Marie from Rovio. And thank you for listening and watching the podcast. Every month we're kind of diving into aspects of mobile games, which is an incredibly dynamic sector. Lots of things going on. We always kind of say lots of things going on, and next month there's even more crazy things going on. So hopefully we're kind of providing some good insight and helping you make some decisions. So don't forget to subscribe through the podcast channels of choice, and I guess now through video podcast channels of choice as well. And if you're feeling very generous, reviews are great. We take reviews if they're good ones. Yeah, thanks very much for watching and listening, and come back next month to see what we're talking about then. Goodbye.